What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. In today's episode, I'm going to talk all about how to protect your plants from strong winds. Now, today we have just ripping winds. They're about 30 to 35 mile an hour gusts, and the problem is that a lot of these trees, they're fruit trees, and fruit trees are very susceptible to breaking. They just don't have the really strong branches like a maple or an oak would. And even maple and oaks are susceptible to breaking under strong winds. But as you get more and more domesticated, you actually get weaker and weaker trees. And that's just a process of domestication. You really lose a lot of that strength, unless, of course, you've taken the steps to properly prune your trees, get them all shaped. And a lot of people just don't have the time to do that, myself included. I've kind of let these really just grow pretty wild. I have not maintained them as much as I really would have liked to. And that's because during the spring, we had a couple really bad ice storms, and we actually lost about half of one of our peach trees because it just snapped right in one of the branches. And so to not further stress out the tree, I've pretty much been letting all my trees just grow wild this year. But what I don't want to happen is I don't want this wind, and it's actually supposed to get worse as this cold front moves through. I really don't want it to get any worse, the wind, and risk breaking some branches. Now, common sense would say, stake them up. I've heard a lot of people say that. Luke, can I drive a stake into the ground and tie my tree up? And the answer is no, you do not want to do that. It's a very common error that I see people making, especially with like newly planted trees. They'll plant a tree and then they'll take a stake and stick it right next to the tree, and then they'll just kind of put some type of rope or bungee cord or something that's going to hold the tree near the post. And that's wrong for a lot of reasons. I'm going to go through those reasons now because I want you all to not do that. There's a lot of better ways to protect your trees from high winds besides staking them, because staking them, believe it or not, could actually kill them. The first reason why staking them is a bad reason is because it does not train the tree to actually strengthen its stem. It actually makes it weaker. So if you're already working with, say, this peach here, which is a very domesticated tree, very weak, has very weak branches, very prone to breaking. If you already have a weak tree, you're only going to make it weaker. And that's because as the tree sways in the wind, it learns to kind of strengthen those joints up where it might be more prone to breaking. So that's the first reason, is you're actually not allowing it to sway enough during the lighter breezes. During the stronger breezes, you might protect it then, but during the lesser breezes, it's not strengthening itself up. It's not working those joints and actually working them like a muscle. So, big problem. Second reason why staking them is a bad thing is because the stake can actually, over time, if you don't do it properly, can actually wear away parts of the tree itself. So when you tie it to the post, if you use something like rope or jute or some type of abrasive material, as that tree is swaying back and forth, it can actually cut and work itself into the bark of the tree. And once you damage the bark of the tree, it opens it up to a whole world of things like pests and diseases that can actually get into the bark. The bark is what protects the tree. And so it's like if you get a cut, your skin is essentially the bark of the tree. And so, so what you don't want to do is you don't want to have a cut that can lead to infection, because then that can cause the tree to die as well. Then the third reason why staking is not a good idea, and that's because so often I see this, especially with young trees. What happens is you stake it too far away, and what can happen is the tension from your rope, when you pull it really tight, can actually cause the tree to grow on an angle. Now, this is for prolonged periods of time. You might have it to be where the post is not straight up and it's on an angle. And when your tree is tied to the post, it's leaning towards the post. And that can actually cause the tree to bend over time and become weaker. So a straighter tree is going to be better. So now I'm going to go through, now that this is finally, hopefully I got that across, that it's not a good idea to stake your trees up. What I want to do is I want to go through really quickly just some ways to help you, to actually help you during high winds protect your trees, because it's certainly something that can be done. It's very easy to do, and it's just takes a couple steps. The first step is proper pruning. When it comes to pruning, it is so important to prune your trees. As I just said in the beginning of this episode, I've really let a lot of these trees kind of just go. I've let them kind of go and grow. And one of the things that you want to do is you want to prune them. The taller the tree, the more surface area it has to catch wind. And wind doesn't typically cut down low. The winds that typically break trees are what's called like a high wind. And high winds are winds that brush across the tops of trees, and it really catches them where they're the most vulnerable and the most top heavy, and that can cause them to break. So you really need to watch out for the tops of trees and making sure that it also helps you harvest. But when your trees start to get 10, 15 feet tall, that's really where those high winds start to take into they start to kind of take into account the potential damage to your tree. So by pruning. Now, how do you prune if let's say you've already kind of gotten the tree shaped and stuff? All you want to do is just kind of reduce how high those branches are. And you'll notice that when the wind blows, right now it's kind of gusting, but it's not even nearly as strong as it's going to get. When the wind blows here, you'll notice that the lower part of the tree does not move as much. The higher parts of the trees, the parts that really move, if you start to get a sway where the branches are actually swaying back and forth in the breeze, what you want to do is you want to cut those branches. Don't cut all of them. You don't have to cut all of them. Just cut the ones that are really swaying. That's the parts that are obviously imbalanced. And what you want to do is you want to create balance. And so what I noticed before I came out here and filmed is that I'm getting a lot of swaying on this top branch up here and this top branch up here. As you can see, I mean, it's doing it right now as the wind is blowing. And so we're getting that real harsh swaying. I'm also actually on my plum tree. I'm getting some swaying over here. And what you don't want to do is you don't want swaying, because what it does is it sways, and it starts swaying faster, and it's almost like it picks up momentum, and then all it takes is a gust, and then it just kind of breaks it. And so what you don't want to do is you don't want to risk that happening. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to prune these ones here that are just swaying a little bit too much for my preference. I'm really going to bring them down and just make sure that they're more balanced. And you don't have to take a whole lot. Like this is not a dramatic pruning. This is just a little bit that's going to keep them more low to the ground. And already I'm so much more confident with this shape of a tree. I have not done a dramatic pruning. I've just cut the branches that are really swaying pretty harshly. So that's the first step. The second step that you can do is you can remove fruit. Now, obviously, these don't have fruit on them, but if you have like an apple tree, a pear tree that still have fruit this time of year, those later fruiting trees, you might still have a whole tree of fruit on them. Now, if you're watching, next year, bookmark this video for next year when this tree is loaded with peaches or cherries or any heavy fruit like that. What you don't want to do is you don't want to have a tree full of fruit, especially if you can be harvesting some of that fruit. Now, if you can't harvest it, there's not a whole lot that you can do. But if you can harvest, if you can pick some of the fruit and it's ready to be picked, what you want to do is pick that fruit, because it's going to reduce the weight. And again, weight equals imbalance. And anytime you have an imbalance, it causes things to sway. And so by harvesting, you're going to reduce the amount of swaying that can take place. And then the third thing that you can do is you can actually remove some weight from the tree. Let's say you've already got it down to size. Let's say it's really harshly swaying even down lower. Now this tree is not. This tree is not swaying down lower, but let's say the whole tree is swaying. That can be really bad, because not only can you risk the tree snapping, but what happens is the tree itself will actually, the trunk, if the trunk itself is moving, it's going to actually work a hole in, and it's kind of almost going to become too top heavy from the top, because it's knocking against the side of the hole, and then it's knocking against the side of the hole, basically at soil level, mind you, so way down low. It's knocking and knocking and knocking, and it's bumping in all those different directions. It's going to work out a hole that's wider than the trunk itself. And then what happens is that can then lead to the whole tree falling over, which I've seen happen way too often. And that can really just be because of an imbalance of weight. Not necessarily a few branches swaying back and forth, but it can be an imbalance where it's just too overgrown, and you need to then remove some foliage. If that is the case, if you're finding your trees really just swaying back and forth like crazy, what you can do is you can actually come in and you can then remove about 30% of the foliage. 30% of the foliage of any kind is going to remove that weight, remove that plant material, so that there's not as much plant material for the wind to catch. Because if you've reduced the surface area, you then reduce how much wind can actually hit against the trees. And then the fourth and final thing that you can do is you can, I've seen this happen in young orchards where they have young planted trees. You can actually apply what's called wind wrap. And wind wrap is basically, they even use it in farms. They'll use it in farms where they don't want the wind blowing snow across their farms. And so what they'll do is they'll take basically this plastic material, and they also make it with wooden slats as well. And for smaller planted trees, obviously it would not be super effective with these taller ones, but what you can do is you can put up this wind wrap. Very, very simple. Just takes a couple posts, a couple T-posts along some newly planted trees in the direction the wind is blowing. So right now the wind is blowing north to south, and it's a real harsh north wind. So what you can do is you can apply that on the north side of your plants. So your plants will be then protected because it creates kind of that wind break. And that wind break is just so important to protecting your youngly planted, your newly planted fruit trees. So those are all the things you can do to protect your fruit trees. And you can also do this. This also applies to other things as well, not just fruit trees, but this applies to ornamental trees, fruit trees. This could even apply to things like tomatoes and peppers, anything that gives a lot of fruit that you don't want snapping. Branches will snap on anything that gets too heavy or too big. And so proper maintenance is very important. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. And did we do that in one take? I do believe we did. Make sure to throw a thumbs up for a one-take wonder. We have very few of those. There's always a distraction. If it's not a squirrel, it's a plane. If it's not a plane, it's a car. If it's not a car, it's a fan riding by on a bike that shouts out, "What's going on, MIgardener?" So I'm super stoked. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. Hopefully you guys learned something new. And as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow big or go home, and we'll catch you all later. See ya. Bye.